All right, welcome back to the program. My second guest is joining me right here. He is Dr. Iliyasu Gashinbaki. He is the president and chairman, governing council of the Chartered Institute of Forensics and Certified Fraud Investigators of Nigeria. That's a mouthful. How do you say it? CIFCFIN or CIFCFIN? Or how do you?
CIFCFIN.
CIFCFIN, okay.
Yeah.
Welcome to the program. Now, let's get
started. Thank you for having me.
Yes, we're talking anti-corruption agenda for Mr. President.
Yes.
While he was campaigning, and perhaps in some of the meetings that he had, did you get a clear-cut direction of his anti-corruption agenda?
Well, not clearly, but from what we have seen so far, is Mr. President wants to be to go head-on with grand corruption rather than dwelling on petty corruptions. I think that's the signal we've seen. That's
the signal you've seen. And what is that grand corruption signal, fight that you're seeing?
Well, first of all, the Institute has looked at this in detail. Last year, the Institute reviewed the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. And we're the only non-state actor that reviewed the anti-corruption strategy of that administration. And we had that unique opportunity of presenting the country report to Mr. President. Now we are doing the second country report. And this time around, what we have done in the country report is that we identify what we call as black holes. That's where we are bleeding, left, right, and center. So basically the focus is, if we are to do anything strategic in the anti-corruption war, you have to just go for the major things. I'm not saying the minor things are not important.
And what are the major things? I'm thinking, I'm ruminating around my mind that perhaps you're talking of the major things to be like this subsidy scam, Forex, and all the other things.
Yeah, the five major things are, number one, is the oil and gas cartel need to be dismantled. And there are 4 key areas to look at there. Number one, subsidy, which he has dealt with, and I think is the right step in the direction.
Has he sufficiently dealt with that?
Yeah, because at least the removal
that
part.
Came with, okay.
Yeah, okay. But there should be a forensic review of a postmortem of the entire subsidy regime, and I'm very sure once that is done, a couple of trillions will be recovered, because just between 2005 and 2022, we are looking at almost 17 trillion gone into payment of subsidy. But how much of that is truly what the government ought to have paid? But that is just one bucket. The other bucket is also the Forex differential, still on the subsidy, that again, that burden is one of the key areas the government has hemorrhaged. But other areas that people seldom talk about is the area of aging infrastructure that we have in the oil and gas industry itself that result to, we will not know again what is a normal loss and what is a normal abnormal loss and what they are even stealing. Then the last bucket under oil and gas will be oil theft itself, that we have seen also billions that have been carted away because of the activities associated with oil theft. Now, the other one that nobody mentions it at all is regulatory compliance issues that we have seen also over the time in the oil and gas sector, that we have lost trillions because of years of inaction. I'll give you one example. There's this law called Offshore Inland Basin Production Assurance Contract Legislation. That act was in place. That was the governance regulation that deals with production assuring contracts. But because of not doing the right thing at the right time, these are not my words. The Revenue Allocation Commission itself came out and said, within the span of 25 years, we have lost over 60 trillion due to inaction of activating just some major clauses in the law. That didn't happen until 2019, and then with the peer, all that is gone. So that's one. The other area also that we consider it as a black hole is when you look at the issue of abandoned projects. We have seen budget over budget, on and on projects scattered all over the country. And this is not just a federal issue. It is also an issue that you find at the subnational level. Now, altogether, we are looking at close to maybe 60,000 abandoned projects across the Federation, in excess of about 17 trillion. That is one black hole that FG, and of course the subnationals, need to also deal with it if we are to deal with this corruption. Because if you can just take off the budget line of funding all those abandoned projects, a lot of savings can be made. Then the third black hole has to do with what we don't also always think as serious, is the Japa syndrome and the amount of decay that we've seen in education. You can imagine a reputable institution like JAM going into press conference and exchanging words with a minor. JAM should.
She says she's 19 years old. So
okay. So if she's 19, she's no longer a minor.
Yes.
But the point I'm making is that there is so much decay in the education system that need to be looked at. It's a black hole itself. The universities are on their knees. We have had protracted ASO strikes. The public education system is collapsing. And we've seen mass exodus of even the few trained experts that we have, from doctors to engineers, under the Japa syndrome. So that is a black hole itself that you cannot quantify its damage to the Nigerian economy. Because in fact, it's much more than anything else. If you look at the entire GDP of Africa today, it's still less than $3 trillion. While Apple, just one company in the US, is in excess of $3 trillion. And that is a product of intellectual thinking. So if we are losing the best and our ablest to Japa, that is a monumental corruption that the president should look at it. And the country report has highlighted that as also a black hole that, that need to be looked at. So the journey for Mr. President is to focus his attention on things that are major. Because if the country is bleeding left, right, and center from every side, the best and the strategic thing to do is to use the mathematical model. In the mathematical model, when you are faced with a challenge, you move from the non-variable to the non-variable. And what we know today is those areas that the country is bleeding profusely that need to stop. So those are the areas that he needs to put his attention.
How about institutional corruption?
Of course.
Even around regulatory agencies and all of that, if you're supposed to like get something for like 100,000 naira, for example, Nigerians may even be willing to pay more to get it earlier. Or people around the agencies will say, if you want me to get it faster, you understand what I'm talking about, institutional corruption.
In fact, when you, that's why I said that there is a need to ensure there is proper regulatory compliance in ensuring that the laws that we have and the clauses that we have in our contracts are even obeyed. Because if the profile for you, the amount of court orders, judgments that you have against FG and the states, they are running into billions And by the time you do a forensic review of those contracts, they are trivial, they are frivolous, and just because one officer didn't do the right thing at the right time.
Okay.
So that need to happen with the major regulators across board.
I don't want us to be so focused also on the central government.
Yes.
What can state governments do, or what can they also learn from the federal government? That's one question. Then the second question is, what are the lessons that Nigeria can also learn from other countries that we need to consider as best practices? I mentioned earlier that in 2022, the Transparency Corruption Index was 150.
Yes.
That was even an improvement from 154 in 2021.
Yes.
But we're still there. We just 150. That's a very bad score. So what are the lessons that we need to learn?
The lesson that we need to learn is to tackle the things that are major. If you tackle the major things, the small things will fall in line. You cannot have a country that is using almost 90% of its revenue servicing debts, and then you now have oil theft as the highest level. You cannot have that. You cannot have a situation where you are struggling to manage public schools, funding of public schools, funding of health care, but at the same time, you are funding a subsidy regime that we know has been riddled with fraud, and it's just not what should be done. So the lessons is to tackle these things head on, just like other countries have done. We have seen that they have implemented that effectively in countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia. So these are countries that successfully, they were able to tackle grand corruption.
Some measures even include capital punishment in some of those countries.
Yes, but again, it's not about capital punishment alone. When you use the surgical approach, for example, the issue of oil theft. If you deploy the infrastructure that is needed to see everything that goes in the pipeline at the touch of the button, just like Aramco, and you deploy drones and reinforce the necessary security measures, carry along the community the way it's supposed to be, it will go away. So the issue is we need to sit down, identify the big things, and focus on it. And I think now that we have dealt with subsidy, and the next thing to look at is this abandoned project that is littered all over, and it has been used over the years as conduit for siphoning our resources. So anything that serves as a drain should be taken away. And we know them. They are known. They are not things that we don't know about. They are things that are common within what we do. Our procurement system needs to be reviewed because, again, if you are talking about contract transparency, if you are talking about open governance partnership, you need to...
Doctor, we have to go now. We have to go. Perhaps we'll continue on another day.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. I've been speaking with Dr. Iliyasu Gashinbaki, who is the President and Chairman, Governing Council of Chartered Institute of Forensics and Certified Fraud Investigators of Nigeria. I had to take a look at that again. We've been talking about anti-corruption in Nigeria. That's the much we can take on today's edition of the program. And this week, I hope you had a good ride with us this week. Please join us again on Monday for another edition of the program. I am Nancy Naji. Be the best you can be and be the change that you want to see. Bye now.